LV. 1. Active skills. -LV. 2. Intimidation LV. 1. Vital points targeting LV. 1. Stealth LV. 1. Well, no wonder people are beginning to notice me. A strange message followed right after the familiar one. Required level. Having only heard this simple message, he couldn't figure out what was going on here. But by the time the following mechanical beep rang, Jinwoo ended up expending a huge amount of willpower just to calm his heart that beat so hard to the point of causing him pain. Class change quest. He was so focused on raising his levels and his stats that he had been forgetting all about a certain column in his status window. Indeed, that was the third column in his status window, the class. And now, he was given an opportunity to replace that none with another word. He'd be given a class. In most video games, a character would receive many benefits after getting a class. It'd be no different with the system, since it operated almost the same as a game. His heart was beating harder and faster now, when he realized that he'd be one step closer to the goal of being strong after going through with this quest. He simply could not calm himself down anymore. Yes and no continued to flicker in front of his eyes. Jinwoo was about to choose yes and take on the quest to change his class. However, he stopped almost instinctively. No, hang on a sec. Who knew just what kind of a quest might show up here? Following right after the notice from his instincts, the warning bells from his brain rang true and clear inside his head. I'm inside a dungeon. A dungeon was one of the most dangerous places in the world. Even though he was fully accustomed to the rank C dungeons by now, a dungeon was still a dungeon after all. There was no reason for him to increase the risk even more. Besides, Yu Jinho was standing next to him as well. It wasn't as if he didn't trust the kid, no. Still, he didn't have any particular reason to let the kid in on the existence of the system, or explain the weird phenomenon that might occur when he changed his class. There was absolutely no one here. Only the dense forest greeted his searching eyes. In order to make sure he'd get to enjoy a relatively safe quest, he searched for a mountainside with almost no human presence and found the most suitable candidate. The current time was 1744. There shouldn't be any hikers in this in-between hour, plus his current location was an empty spot of land far, far removed from any hiking trails. Time to get started. Jinwoo accessed his mailbox. The message popped up in his view as if it had been patiently waiting for him. Yes, I'm taking it on. The moment he thought of taking on the quest, another message popped into his view. Generating a new dungeon. Before he had the chance to interpret what that message was saying, a change took place before him really fast. A black hole formed right in front of his eyes. That was merely the beginning, too. The black hole the size of a bean expanded to the size of a coin, then to that of a volleyball, and eventually it grew large enough for a person to walk through. Isn't this? Jinwoo's eyes grew wider. He was expecting to see a new message with the contents of the quest pop up in front of his eyes. But this, what appeared before him was, without a doubt, a gate. To think a gate would show up here. This one didn't seem any different from the others he was familiar with. Only that, it was a bit smaller than usual. This is no time to daydream. If he succeeded, then a new class and all the rewards that followed would be his. And if he failed, then he couldn't even tell what might happen to him. So, he needed to focus here. After taking a deep breath, Jinwoo held the poison fang of Kasaka in reverse grip and entered the gate. This isn't going to be easy, is it? Maybe because his class change was up for grabs, there were quite a few restrictions here to contend with. The most important one was that he couldn't replenish his spent energy or stamina, and couldn't heal himself using potions or level ups. The damage will stack, in other words. If he got injured, then that would spell his doom. The exit is blocked off, an unknown grade, impossible to heal himself, and no exit. This dungeon was a pretty risky proposition. If clearing this place was difficult because of all the restrictions, then didn't that also mean there was an amazing opportunity waiting for him at the end? He took one last glance behind him and slowly made his way forward, the torch lighting the way. Just how long did he walk? When he walked for a long, long time, he finally got to a bend in the passageway, and just beyond it, he sensed multiple presences. Clank, clank. Whenever this thing took a step, the metallic clang reverberated loudly in the passageway. The noises were getting closer. Jinwoo aimed for the side of its neck. Clang, but he got to hear metal hitting metal instead. The blade didn't go in. Metal armor. Jinwoo's eyes widened. Finally confirming the identity of his opponent, Jinwoo quickly took several steps back. It's a human. He was now facing a knight decked out fully in a suit of armor. Its face was hidden behind the helmet and he couldn't see what they looked like. Jinwoo called out to it while thinking to himself, could it be? However, the knight didn't even utter a word and simply lunged in Jinwoo's direction. He couldn't sense the beating heart that a normal person should possess, so, most likely, it was not a human. He was now facing off against a type of monster he'd never even heard of before. The first one to strike wins. Before the enemy made its move, Jinwoo dashed in first. Swish. Jinwoo evaded the hurried swing of the knight's longsword and stabbed his dagger at various points in its armor. Unfortunately, he couldn't damage it. The armor's too thick. Not only was it thick, the surface was smooth as well, so when he landed a straight blow, the blade didn't go in but simply slid off to the side. It was at this point that the knight swung its sword in a huge arc. Vital points targeting. Crack. The tip of the dagger penetrated past the armor. Did it work? However, it must have not suffered any damage, since it swung its sword down vertically with great force, not caring at all about the dagger stuck to its side. It's not really that strong, is it? That was his earnest assessment. Probably because of all that heavy armor, its movement was dull, and its attack pattern was also rather simple, too. Only that, its defense against bladed weapons was truly exceptional. Jinwoo rolled up his sleeves. Well, I've already fought against an enemy with thick armor that blades can't penetrate. The boss monster, poison-fanged blue Kasaka that broke a steel sword infused with magical energy in one hit. He had experienced killing such a snake before. Compared to the Kasaka, that thing is nothing. A thin smile slowly formed on Jinwoo's lips, since that was a pretty good memory to recall. Jinwoo easily evaded the knight's attack aimed at his shoulder, slid to its back, and caught it in a headlock. Crack. Along with a pretty sickening noise, the helmet was ripped off. This was the moment when his strength stat exceeding 100 points had begun shining ever so brightly. A simple but concise message announcing the end of the battle popped up. A flickering light indicating the presence of loot came from somewhere on the armor, but Jinwoo's attention was elsewhere. What the heck? There's nothing inside. The helmet he held in his hands was totally empty. He quickly checked inside the armor to make sure, but it was the same story, empty. Does that mean I was fighting against a suit of armor that was moving by itself? Just as he arrived at his conclusion, two more knights rushed into view from around the bend. It seemed that they had belatedly sensed the unfolding battle. The knights discovered Jinwoo, and as if they had made a prior arrangement, they unsheathed their long swords in unison. Jinwoo tossed the empty helmet away and loosened the muscles on his neck and shoulders. He now knew how to fight these things. So, this is the real beginning, huh? Jinwoo's lips formed a slight grin as he stared at the knights rushing towards him. His first step in clearing this dungeon proved to be on the right track. Was it because of all the restrictions? The loot drop rate turned out to be rather excellent. Jinwoo only defeated 3 knights, yet 2 of them dropped an item each. As far as percentages go, that was 66.6%. It was an unimaginably high drop rate compared to other instant dungeons. Rarity B. Type Armor. Reduction in physical damage, plus 7%. Jinwoo picked up the breastplate. As expected, a message regarding equipping the armor popped up in his view. The breastplate disappeared from the view. Jinwoo summoned the status window and confirmed his stats. So, it really went up. Jinwoo felt around his chest area. He couldn't feel anything weird. I got 30,000 gold in one go. Was it because knights were supposed to be wealthy or some such? He abruptly remembered that most humanoid-type monsters usually gave out more loot than any other types in video games. During the past 2 hours of hunting inside the dungeon, he met 4 different types of monsters: knights, mages, assassins, and archers. Is it stealth this time? An assassin type suddenly vanished from his senses. Jinwoo didn't panic and extended his perception to its fullest, and soon enough picked up on the presence sneaking up on him from behind. Swish. The assassin received a fatal wound and turned into a wisp of black smoke before disappearing from his view with nary a scream. Jinwoo turned around to continue on his journey. But then, a flash of blinding light exploded right in front of his eyes. A mage had hidden itself and quietly completed a light magic spell. Kaboom! However, Jinwoo was already well behind the mage by the time that happened. Jinwoo didn't miss this opening and swung his dagger diagonally. The mage, too, turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared. I got hit by one of those way back when I got too careless. The thing was, he was already ready to react as soon as he began sensing mana gathering around in a single point. Jojiu H1's light magic. Jinwoo wasn't dumb enough to get hit by a similar magic to that dead guy's. This was one of the reasons why he thought that all these battles were like him studying and revisiting his past fights. That's not all, is it? In order to defeat different types of monsters, he needed different stats. For knights, it was strength. For assassins, perception. Archers, agility. And finally, for mages, it was stamina. The whole thing was set up in a way that if any of the corresponding stats weren't high enough, he'd have a real hard time trying to deal with the individual monsters. If his strength was lacking, then he wouldn't have been able to cause enough damage to the knights, and if his perception was too low, He'd have gone through hell in order to locate the assassins. Me raising stats evenly has really paid off dividends here. His intelligence stat was still on the low side, but all he had to do there was to economize his MP usage. Jinwoo summoned the canteen as soon as it showed up in his inventory and took several gulps. Phew, his fatigue was piling up noticeably now. Just how far am I supposed to go here? Could there be no end to this place? Jinwoo put the empty canteen down on the ground and placed his hands on his hips. It had been over 3 hours already since he entered this dungeon. Both his body and mind were getting fatigued now. Jinwoo sat down and leaned against the cave wall. The tiredness stat had sneaked up to a dangerous level, above 70. His body and mind would start to get negatively affected. He needed to take a short nap and decrease that stat right away. Jinwoo leaned his head against the wall. Sleepiness came over him almost instantly. However, he heard the sharp whistle of air parting ways. Time slowed down, and Jinwoo accurately snatched the flying arrow with his hand. Grab. Jinwoo's eyes opened up. He saw an archer knocking another arrow from some distance away. So, it's still too early to fall asleep, is it? Jinwoo summoned the poison fang of Kasaka once more and stood back up. Crunch. One single punch caused the knight's breastplate to crack and cave in. The lifeless monster slowly slid to the ground in between Jinwoo's stretched fist and the wall. Jinwoo looked down on his slightly skinned fist and clicked his tongue. Only a short break would have taken care of such a small wound by now. However, these abominable monsters didn't give him a moment to rest. Still, he earned quite a lot in the meantime. Gatekeeper's necklace, superior knight's breastplate, intermediate assassin's shoes, inferior archer's gloves, superior maid's ring. Other useful things he found along the way were now all safely tucked away in his inventory. It had been nicer if I found a weapon, though. Finally, the torchlight revealed the end of the road, and that end was blocked off by a huge castle gate. It was quite rare to see the boss room with a door like that. Naturally, he recalled the dual dungeon. No one was adequately prepared back then, and because of that, the losses incurred were great. However, it was different now. Jinwoo reached out and grasped the handles of the doors. The heavy-looking doors slid open rather smoothly, as if there was some sort of an unseen mechanism. Boom. The door to the boss room finally opened. As soon as he set foot on this floor, countless torches lining up the walls lit up all at once and illuminated the interior. As I thought, it's almost the same as back in that underground temple. Jinwoo maintained his vigilance. He scanned his vicinity and cautiously stepped forward. Several giant stone pillars stood erect to his left and right. At the far end of this room, he could see a tall throne. It's as if this place reminded him of the king's audience chamber from a fantasy movie. Of course, the scale was noticeably larger, though. A few steps later, the door issued a loud bang and closed shut behind him. Slam. Jinwoo glanced back, but he didn't panic. He already expected something like that to happen. Jinwoo swallowed his dry saliva. He only had to take one look at the creature's red name floating just above its head to know that the boss had finally made its entrance. It was a knight wearing a suit of blood-red armor. The way it was kitted out from head to toe in metal armor was similar to other knights he fought so far, but quite unlike those that looked dull and slow. This thing looked incredibly agile. What caught his eyes next was its helm. The red-colored mane extending rearwards from the top of the helm reminded him of a stallion's tail, and it left a rather deep impression. While he studied its helm, Jinwoo discovered one more difference between it and the other knights. This guy has eyes. But were they eyes or irises? Whatever the case may be, the pair of silvery lights oozed out from where one's eyes should be. They felt so cold and uncaring, utterly mechanical and lifeless. Jinwoo observed the movements of this egret while slowly raising his clenched fists. My dagger won't work on it anyway. What was needed in defeating a knight was blunt force. He needed strength to overwhelm him. Ygritte quietly observed Jinwoo for a while, before it abruptly took off its red cape. Plop, the cape fell to the floor. What's it doing? The beastard's strange actions didn't end there. It proceeded to take off the long sword on its hips, and the 2 daggers hidden behind its back, and dropped them all to the ground. Not only that, it showed them to him, before dropping them one at a time. Clang, clang. The interior of the boss room had been quiet until then. The loud clangs of the metal hitting the stone tiles reverberated noisily throughout this vast chamber. Ygritte finished discarding all of its weapons, and as if to imitate Jinwoo, clenched its fists and got into a fighting stance. Jinwoo's eyes grew wider. Could this beastard be thinking of? Was this thing going to fight him bare-handed because he was also bare-handed? Jinwoo bit his lower lip. It's looking down on me. Come. Perhaps reading his mind, Ygritte made a beeline towards him. The speed it produced was so fast that he found it hard to believe it was wearing a suit of armor. He raised both of his arms instinctively to guard himself, but the impact force still got transmitted to the rest of his body. Boom! His guard broke and his entire body became airborne. What? A shocked gasp escaped from his mouth, but soon it turned into a groan, because Ygritte had already appeared right in front of his eyes. Slam! The inside of his ears rang noisily. Jinwoo shook his head around a couple of times. Only then did the loud ringing die down somewhat. However, the much bigger problem than that was coming closer to him. His blurry sight captured Ygritte as it walked towards him. Jinwoo opened his eyes wider and got ready. Eventually, Ygritte arrived right before Jinwoo's nose, and so, a bloody dogfight erupted between the two. Ygritte didn't even try to dodge Jinwoo's punches. No, it simply took on the hits and counter-attacked right away. Pow! Ygritte's head was forced slightly to the side. But, even before Jinwoo could correct his posture, a sharp and accurate counterpunch flew at him. Jinwoo tottered about like a drunken man. What is this nonsensical bullshit? Currently, Jinwoo's physical damage reduction stat had exceeded 30%. However, each of Ygritte's attacks hurt like crazy, as if he was being pounded on by a hammer. On the other hand, his attacks almost didn't inflict any damage to the enemy. Their exchange didn't last for long afterwards. Flop! He tried to stand back up, but his legs didn't want to listen. Ygritte stood before Jinwoo, but stopped attacking him. It wordlessly stared down at him for a while. Then, while ignoring Jinwoo's question-filled gaze directed at it, Ygritte extended its hand out towards the sword discarded to the ground some distance away. Then, the sword was automatically reeled in. Ygritte grasped the sword in both of its hands and walked to the side of Jinwoo. You want to execute me, is that it? This beastard certainly lived up to its title as the captain of the knights. When it looked like Jinwoo wasn't going to resist his final moments, Ygritte went ahead with the execution. Of course, Jinwoo wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The sword fell down in a straight line. However, Jinwoo reached up with his left hand and blocked the descending blade. The noise of metal hitting metal. The gauntlet he found just before entering here protected his hand. Flinch. He sensed Ygritte being taken back just now. The poison fang of Kasaka was summoned instantly into his hand, and Jinwoo stabbed the dagger in the creature's eye. A scream that couldn't have come from a human being exploded out. At the same time, a fierce light poured out from the eye with the dagger sticking out. Jinwoo hurriedly stood back up. Now what? Just damaging one eye wouldn't be able to determine the winner of this battle. He needed an attack even more powerful than that if he wanted to win. It was then a thought entered his mind. The horrifying attack that almost pushed him to the brink of death the other day. Jinwoo bent down and bear-hugged Ygritte's midriff. And then, he began running. Ygritte thrashed about in pain and managed to land several solid blows on Jinwoo's back. However, he gritted his teeth and didn't let Ygritte go. No, he increased his speed instead. He dashed towards the nearest wall with every ounce of energy he had. The impact force was great enough for the entire boss room to tremble momentarily. I need to finish this. Jinwoo yanked the poison fang of Kasaka, still buried in its eye, loose. That caused Ygritte's body to quiver once. Jinwoo held the dagger in a reverse grip and stabbed hard at the beastard's neck. Vital points targeting. The attack failed to work. One more time. Vital points targeting. Sparks flew off from the tip of the dagger. A small nick formed on the metal covering the monster's neck. One more time. Vital points targeting. Clang. One more. Clang. One more. Clang. And finally, vital points targeting. The poison fang of Kasaka broke past the protective metal and dug deep into its neck. Jinwoo raised both of his hands up high into the sky. He took several steps back, before losing all strength in his legs and faltered to the floor. Jinwoo spat out the heavy breaths he'd been holding in until now. He won, somehow. It was an incredibly close fight. However, wasn't this the end of the quest? Jinwoo collected his breaths for a long time, before painfully raising his body up. He expected the class quest to end once he killed this guy, but not one message popped up in his view. He looked around, but he failed to spot anything different in the boss room. No, there was one thing that was different from before. Several strands of light began flickering on Ygritte's body, meaning his loot was now ready. For the time being, let's grab those. After all, he couldn't tell what else might happen here. Grabbing things that he could grab when there was a chance was the smartest move one could make, wasn't it? Jinwoo reached out towards those lights. Why were there so many? Jinwoo felt rather puzzled, but still, he couldn't hide his elation, either. The first thing to enter his inventory was the leather pouch. Jinwoo's eyes went extra round. The level of reward is on another scale altogether. It definitely was worth it, defeating it after going through so much crap. He wasn't expecting all that much to begin with, yet the leather pouch spat out an unbelievable amount of 1,500,000 gold. However, Jinwoo's attention was directed elsewhere at the moment. If the leather pouch he didn't even hold high hopes for managed to produce such wealth, then just how high was the value of the helm or the rune stone? Rarity S. Type Armor. Reduction in physical damage plus 15%. Stamina plus 20. Strength plus 20. It's an S. Jinwoo cried out in elation. For the first time ever, an item with a rarity ranking of S showed up. Just the effect of 15% reduction in physical damage alone would have made it a top-tier item. Yet it even possessed two more remarkable additional attributes of raising the stamina and strength stats by 20 points each. Just seeing those options alone made his heart palpitate so much faster. The rarity items can't even compare to it. He was fully aware of the fact that he was standing in the middle of the dungeon's boss room, yet the smile on his face didn't want to go away. And if he were to add in one more unnecessary point here, he even liked the helm's design. It's a bit of a pity to hide this thing, though. The crimson helm that immediately reminded all onlookers of the flowing blood, and the mane connected to the helm itself, made him feel like he was holding an artistic masterpiece. It was only for a brief moment, but he even felt compelled to put on the full set of this armor if it existed somewhere. However, what a waste. Ygritte's other armor pieces weren't considered to be loot, as there were no lights coming off from them. Only the helm could be taken away. With the trace of excitement still lingering in his mind, Jinwoo shifted his gaze to the other two items. Two pieces of stones. Out of the two walnut-sized stones, the first one to grab his curious gaze was the immediate return stone. I know what is a rune stone, but this. Just what could this immediate return stone do? His curiosity got resolved pretty quickly. However, the information on the immediate return stone floated up right away. Rarity. Type Consumable. An item exclusive to this class change quest. When destroyed, you'll be transported outside the dungeon immediately. However, once the class change quest has been concluded, it will automatically be destroyed. Can't be stored in the inventory. The way to use it was similar to a rune stone. However, to think that its effect wasn't about absorbing a new skill, but to escape from this dungeon. Hang on a sec. The class change quest isn't over yet. Sure enough, the warning beep from the system went off in his head as if it was waiting for this moment. Son of a BTCH. So, this was the item to start the quest for real. He nearly fainted on the spot. He felt like he had stepped on something he shouldn't have in the first place. If I knew this might happen, I'd have taken a short break first. What would regret do for him now? No matter how much one relied on one's experience and knowledge to predict the future, one would never be able to correctly guess the tricks of fate. A strand of cold sweat dripped down from Jinwoo's forehead. Just as he swallowed a bit of dry spit and his Adam's apple bobbed up and down, the system's new message popped up in his view. Endure. Endure what exactly? He ended up shouting out loudly as his frustration mounted. For the first time ever, the system expressed emotion. Too bad, he had no time to stew inside his shock. The moment the timer hit 0, several gates began forming all around him. Not just one or two, either. He first spotted 6 around him. The number continued to climb up even higher, however. When the knights decked out in full armor formed silver-colored waves, the ground couldn't help but tremor from the weight. The momentum these things displayed would have been enough to overwhelm most people, but there was a smile floating up onto Jinwoo's lips instead. If it's these guys, I can definitely fight them. In a way, he was oh so glad to see them as his opponents. If the monsters coming out from the gates happened to be as strong as Ygritte, then he wouldn't even be able to last a couple of seconds. Stealth. Jinwoo used some part of the remaining MP and activated the skill Stealth. For the time being, I should observe what's happening here first. Jinwoo's form blurred and slowly disappeared. As expected, the knights rushing towards him all came to an abrupt halt. However, he spotted a mage that had just emerged from the gate chanting a spell. That's also when Jinwoo discovered an eye-like symbol floating above the head of the mage. The moment that eye flashed. In that moment, Jinwoo's stealth was cancelled. FCK. From the get-go, his calculation proved to be way off the mark. The knights that stood around like telephone poles snapped their heads all at once towards Jinwoo's direction. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie, and soon enough, the silver waves pounced on him. Jinwoo's eyes opened wider and he gritted his teeth. Boom. His punch blew away the head of the incoming knight. That guy died where it stood. Crazed lights shone in Jinwoo's eyes. Intimidation. The movements of the monsters became much duller through the effects of fear, but his mana fell down to 90 points. The intimidation required 100 MP in order to activate. He wouldn't be able to use it the second time. However, I just bought myself a minute, intending to use this precious minute to the best of his abilities as the monsters were noticeably weakened. Jinwoo began wailing on them with everything he had. With a terrifying momentum, he proceeded to utterly dismantle the knights. Too bad. The speed of him defeating knights was far inferior to the rate of the replacement knights popping out from the gates. Even in the midst of the maddened battle, Jinwoo sneaked a glance at the timer. It had only been 3 minutes and 19 seconds. If that was converted into points, how much would he get? Wouldn't it be fine for him to leave this place now? However, he didn't have any leeway to dwell on that matter. Even while he was thinking to himself, knights were continuously pouring out from the gates like unstoppable waves. He managed to destroy countless knights, yet he simply couldn't deal with so many of them. In the end, Jinwoo was buried in the sea of knights. His HP was in a freefall now and eventually it hit rock bottom. The time is 5 minutes and 8 seconds. He had endured enough, hadn't he? Let's get out of here. Now completely entrapped among the knights, Jinwoo flailed about helplessly in this silver prison and dug through his back pocket. However, the immediate return stone slipped out from his grasp and fell to the floor, and the roundish stone hit the soul of one of the knights and rolled away far from him. Jinwoo hurriedly reached out towards the stone, but the knights blocked him. Soon, knights piled up on top of him, too. It became almost impossible to breathe in an instant. His consciousness began to blur. Pow, pow. He continuously got struck by the knights while trapped below them, and as his mind began to grow dimmer, he thought he heard a snarky cackle coming from somewhere. The knights surrounding and pressing down on Jinwoo were suddenly all blown away. Even though he somehow managed to crawl out from death, his eyes were burning with life. As a matter of fact, his eyes were burning with a stubborn will and sheer malice. I won't let it end like this. He earned this opportunity after going through so much. So, how could he let it end like this? Never, because he was stuck at the very bottom for so long. He yearned to be on top more than anyone else. He knew the sorrow of the weak better than anyone. He tried everything to survive, and when he did survive, others kept pointing fingers at him. How will a Ranky be of any help here? The association is being way too much. They should have dispatched someone who could actually lend a bit of help. That beastard, maybe he keeps surviving by hiding behind his colleagues every time. So, how could he simply watch and do nothing, when a ladder that could take him to the very top was put in front of his eyes? I remember now, that voice ringing around his head just now. That voice belonged to those beastards. The voice that always yapped on and on from behind his back. Fine, laugh all you want. I'll struggle on until the bitter end. It's fine if my HP drops to 10, no 1. I'll struggle and struggle on like crazy right until the end. I'll fight until I won't be able to move anymore. Slam. 2 more knights were destroyed in the meantime. Unlike Jinwoo's unyielding stubbornness, though, his entire body was now riddled with all sorts of wounds. It progressively much harder to lift his arms. His weakened fist wasn't enough to stop the knight's tackles and charges anymore. From the front, one, from the back, another one. Slam. Jinwoo was sandwiched powerfully by the 2 knights slamming into him from the front and back, and he spat out a pained groan. Other knights pounced on him as if they didn't want to miss this chance. In the blink of an eye, Jinwoo was buried under the masses of knights and couldn't even lift a finger. Even during that, more knights continued to pile on top of Jinwoo. He was in a truly desperate situation. Even then, Jinwoo did not give up, though. No, not yet. I can still go on. Just as Jinwoo managed to clench the hand pointing at the sky, the mysterious countdown ticking down finally announced its conclusion. Penalty zone. He then remembered it. He didn't do the daily quest for today. He was planning on confirming the results of his constant leveling up, and to help him decide whether he was ready to tackle the demon's castle or not. Who could have guessed that things might unfold in this manner? Just like back in the hospital, everything began to violently shake. The knights piling on top of Jinwoo turned into figures of sand one by one. The world surrounding him was changing. Jinwoo soundlessly laughed to himself. For some reason, the words the system spoke to him before the beginning of the quest circled around inside his head. Was it trying to imply that the quest itself was unimaginably hard, to the point that he needed luck to complete it? Or was it implying that it'd cheer him on, as he resorted to borrowing the power of luck and earn a ton of advancement points that way? His fingers dug into the desert sand as the held-up breaths exploded out of his mouth. Fresh air entered and flowed into every corner of his body via his lungs. Finally, I feel alive. The sense of relief wrapped Jinwoo up tightly as he rolled onto his back. He was wondering why it was so difficult to move his body, but as it turned out, the DMN tiredness stat was over 90. This is probably my first time that stat has gone past 90, right? 2 words, buy and sell, popped up in the air. Although the layout of this store imparted not one hint of sincerity, no matter how kind he looked at it, he found it such a welcoming sight right now. He picked out the most expensive healing potion on sale. As soon as he confirmed the purchase, the glass bottle containing red liquid appeared on his wide-open palm. Jinwoo laboriously popped the cork open and poured the potion down his mouth. Just one bottle was enough to lower the tiredness value at a visible rate. However, for some reason, his HP value didn't change at all. Even after he finished the whole bottle, his HP didn't recover. It was such a noticeable contrast to his tiredness stat hitting 0. Why is it doing this? Only after he completely drained the bottle did he finally get to understand the reason for this anomaly. What a simple reason, that his remaining HP was too low. And sure, they should pop up right about now. And just as he expected, he sensed the presence of life forms beneath the surface. Jinwoo tightly shrunk his body for a second before springing up to his feet. His entire body felt as light as feather. His strength had returned in full thanks to the potion. The sand exploded up like a pillar and the huge centipede revealed itself. Everything matched up to his memories so far. And I found this thing so terrifying to look at back then, too. But now, he couldn't help feeling like he was looking at some video footage being played in slow motion. Jinwoo raised his eyes a bit higher, and he got to clearly confirm those red letters floating above the centipede's head. Its name was in red letters, the same color as the Cerberus from the demon's castle. It was then the quest message appeared before his eyes. Please survive until the end of the time limit. Time limit, 4 hours. Remaining time, 4 hours 0 minutes 0 seconds. Confirming the details of the message, Jinwoo clenched his fist tightly. I can buy myself time with this. Since he hadn't used the immediate return stone to escape from the dungeon, he still had a shot here. I'm pretty sure that, as soon as the penalty quest is over, I will be sent back to that place. What if time spent inside the penalty zone was acknowledged as the time he endured during the quest? His advancement points tally would be enormous. There was one issue he still had to resolve first, however, and that would be whether he could get out of this place unscathed with only 100 or so HP remaining. As it was impossible to heal himself using potions, he had to do his best to cautiously kill these centipedes until he leveled up. As the result of wrestling around with these centipedes for the past 4 hours, his level rose up 4 times and now it sat at 51. Before he knew it, the penalty quest was coming to an end. Jinwoo took a sweeping look around him. The corpses of centipedes filled up his view everywhere he looked. Thanks to them, he got to recover his HP back to full. It's a bit of waste that these things don't give any loot or gold. Well, it'd be strange that loot would come out when he was supposed to get punished in this place. He stopped worrying about that and got ready instead. Store. Humanoid-type monsters dropped the gold-containing leather pouch really often, and also, Ygritte also gave him 1.5 million gold in one go. So, he now had enough funds to spend. Jinwoo spent all that gold to buy one single weapon. As a matter of fact, there was this one dagger that caught his eye. Rarity B. Type dagger. Attack plus 75. A sharp and sturdy dagger designed to cut through the armor worn by the knights. The edges of the blade are shaped like the teeth of a saw blade, thus it won't slide off the armor's surface easily. Effect killing knights plus 25% additional damage when attacking heavily armored opponents. It was a specially crafted weapon to deal with armor-wearing enemies, and it cost 2.8 million gold. He had to spend almost every gold he had in reserve to buy this weapon, but he didn't have any leeway to shed a tear over it. It's not like I can take the gold with me to the grave, anyway. He didn't hesitate and bought the dagger. Along with the Night Killer, Jinwoo also bought a roll of bandages. He held the dagger with a rather scary-looking saw blade-like cutting edge in his right hand, and wrapped them both tightly with the bandage. Swish, swish. When he swung the Night Killer around a couple of times, it felt like the dagger had become a part of his limb now. At a bare minimum, I shouldn't drop it accidentally. While he was putting away the leftover bandage into inventory, he spotted the rune stone from Ygritte. There was this thing, too. You can absorb the skill by breaking this rune stone. Right now, he needed to grasp at everything, even if that was a piece of straw. Whether that was an item or a skill, he needed to obtain whatever that could become his combat strength. Jinwoo didn't hesitate and broke the rune stone. Active skill. Required mana to activate, none. Even without touching, you can physically influence an object. As soon as he read that description, he recalled a certain scene. It was when Ygritte extended its hand towards its longsword that was discarded on the floor, far away. So, this is the skill that made the sword move back then. A skill that could move objects around from a distance with nothing but his will. On top of that, he didn't even have to spend any mana either. If I am able to move any object I see just like the description says, then this would be one hell of a skill to possess. Jinwoo immediately tried to experiment with the skill on the corpse of the centipede next to him. If he wanted to move something heavy, then it was likely that his proficiency with the skill had to be much higher. From here onwards, it's back to the class change quest. Inside that boss room, hundreds of monsters were waiting for his return. Or, the number could be even higher now. If he was being kind here, he was returning to that place, but truthfully, it was more like him being thrown back in there. HP, MP, tiredness, equipment, and even a new skill. And his renewed resolve. His current condition was so much better than when he first set foot in that place, but when he thought about going back there, he couldn't help but get tense and nervous. The knights all began rushing violently towards him. Where are the mages? Not too far from him, he spotted a lone mage. As I thought, what he witnessed back then was right. Indeed, he didn't see wrong. Back then, when he was being squeezed tight by the group of knights and only his arm could flail about helplessly, Jinwoo spotted something through the narrow gaps he couldn't quite understand at the time. And that was a mage continuously chanting a spell. A mage busy chanting a spell. At a casual glance, that wouldn't be something out of place. However, Jinwoo still felt a strong sense of discord from that. If that's the case, then how come? How come he saw not one single spell flying at him? Mages busy chanting but not casting any spells. Knights that apparently didn't give out any experience points. When he took these actions of the two separate groups that puzzled him so much and combined them into one singular puzzle, a new possibility formed in Jinwoo's head. It could be. It was possible that all of the knights there were fake. He sensed the mage panicking after spotting his approach, and its casting speed had increased. Suddenly, the knights no longer attacked him without a plan and tried to gather around the mage to protect it. With that, Jinwoo was convinced now. Stab. The mage soundlessly turned into a wisp of black smoke and disappeared from the view. And at the same time, hundreds of knights rushing in to attack Jinwoo all collapsed at the same time. It was as if they were puppets with their strings cut. The knights collapsed on the floor were now, more or less, empty suits of armor. This was my answer. Jinwoo cried out inwardly in elation. He had to go through several near-death situations just to get to this conclusion. Stealth. Jinwoo's form blurred in an instant. Of course, he wasn't trying to hide via stealth. What he was aiming for was. The ear-piercing mechanical beeps rang out from several directions. Jinwoo ran on top of the knights and quickly confirmed the positions of the eye-like symbols. There are a total of 5 mages. Jinwoo targeted the closest mage to him. The mage hurriedly gathered knights around it the moment Jinwoo turned to stare at it. But, swish, the poison fang of Kasaka flew out of his left hand in a straight line and stabbed accurately in the middle of the mage's forehead. Once more, hundreds of knights tumbled to the ground. He sneaked a glance towards the poison fang of Kasaka he hadn't recovered yet. It was time to use his new skill. Ruler's Reach. Jinwoo extended his left hand towards the dagger, and as if a magnet was pulling it in, the weapon flew back in. Yes, Jinwoo snatched the dagger off the air. Now that he didn't have to personally retrieve his dagger, he could take the most efficient route to his target. In the next second, he arrived before the next mage, and, even before the knights could try anything, he cut the beastard up in half. More knights collapsed again. The initiative was clearly with him now. Jinwoo's glare became harsher. There are 3 left. Perhaps sensing the threat, the remaining mages all gathered in one spot. It wasn't only them, either. The knights they controlled also gathered around them. And then, the mages all chanted a certain spell together. Their ominous and creepy voices reverberated throughout the boss room and soon, they finished their spell. The knights guarding the mages were suddenly pulled into one lump and got compressed as if they were thrown into an industrial crusher. And then, they were reborn as one huge metal golem which began glaring at Jinwoo right away. Wow, this is no joke, huh? Jinwoo leaked out a gasp of pure admiration after sensing the overwhelming pressure emitted from this giant monster. However, he wasn't scared by its appearance at all. Perhaps because he had encountered several life or death situations already. He was feeling expectant rather than nervous. Jinwoo ducked lower and dodged the golem's fist. The stone pillar behind Jinwoo shattered into pieces after its metallic fist grazed it. Well, that is pretty serious power. Jinwoo grinned slyly. If he hadn't yet figured out what was going on here, he would have been racking his brain trying to figure out how to deal with this monster. However, there was no need for him to worry about that now. No need at all. Just as the golem locked its hands together and raised them high to smash down, Jinwoo didn't back away, but used his skill, dash, and pounced forward. And then, he slid on the floor. In the blink of an eye, he had slid in between the legs of the golem and shot right past it. While the lumbering golem was hastily turning around, Jinwoo had already arrived before the 3 completely defenseless mages, still busy chanting their spell. It was far easier to kill them off because they had gathered in one place. Jinwoo freely swung his daggers about, and the remaining 3 mages also became smoke and joined their already departed comrades. And the golem that was trying to hurriedly grab Jinwoo shattered into pieces of armor and scattered all over the place. Jinwoo didn't let his guard down, however. Is this the end? Or is there something more? He remained alert and ready just in case something else might happen. But then, the familiar beep went off in his head. Jinwoo swallowed his saliva, perhaps to laugh at his unnecessary worries. The system announced the end of the quest, instead. Only now could Jinwoo spit out a sigh of relief. He had endured for almost 4.5 hours, and that wasn't all. In a quest that could be cleared simply by enduring the combined assault of the countless enemies for a while, he actually managed to kill them all. Just from wondering about how many points he got to accumulate and what kind of a class he'd earn from that, his heart began trembling in anticipation. Yup, that sounds good. If his past actions were used as the basis for the selection of his class, then the odds of him ending up with something weird and struggling in the future would be close to 0 now. It was probably the most welcoming thing he'd heard in a while. He thought that this description was a bit too heartless and cold. But after looking back, he couldn't come up with anything to rebut those words. I only did those in order to raise my level, though. After entering an instant dungeon, he kept hunting monsters down until his level would not rise anymore. And while inside a regular dungeon, he made sure to find every single hidden monster there and slew them all, too. Also, although it wasn't his intention, he ended up fighting other hunters a couple of times, too. Assassin, corpses, and the scent of blood. No matter how you look at it, just as he suspected from the beginning, it seemed that his class would be set at assassin now. Nod. Jinwoo nodded his head in agreement with the system's assessment. Well, it's not like I had any trustworthy comrades to begin with. However, he couldn't understand why those points were being addressed during the selection of his class. The system's explanation continued on. The army of the deceased. Only now had Jinwoo realized something had gone awry here. Too bad, though. No, wait. Even before he had any chance to raise his objections, the system read off the result of the selection in its usual dry and humorless voice. What the FCK? What was the meaning of this sudden slap to the back of his head? Everything was going well, so why did Necromancer pop out instead of the expected assassin? Jinwoo dazedly stared at the message. He even rubbed his eyes several times, but nothing changed. The message still floated up there, unchanging. He couldn't believe it at first, then he became really angry next. I've never even touched the intelligence stat, so what the hell? Just how did he end up with a rare class not even found among countless mage-type hunters in the world? From the moment Jinwoo awoke as a ranky hunter, he was always a close-quarters fighter. With the exception of the steel longsword, he always used daggers, and the skills he got until now were perfectly suited for the role of an assassin. That was why he hadn't even thought of the possibility that his class would end up belonging to a different type altogether. It was a magic type, no less. No, more than that, a necromancer. His knowledge of different classes came from video games, but even then, he knew enough about what being a necromancer entailed. A gloomy-looking mage, and an army of undead following that dude. No matter how much he thought about it, that image just didn't correlate to him whatsoever. If you were to think about the advantages of being a necromancer, then, just as the system alluded to, he could create his own army. About that much. Well, the problem here is that army will consist of skeletons and rotting corpses. If you walked around with such an army, the whole world would be up in arms in no time. The system demanded his answer. What a relief that was. I can still say yes or no. Jinwoo spat out a sigh. If the class wasn't forced down his throat, then that meant there was another opportunity for him. If he still had another shot, then there was no reason to sweat so much right now. Jinwoo gladly refused the suggestion. No way. When he did that, the message asked him again. Although it was asking the same thing for the second time, he found himself unable to quickly answer back. He was now hesitating. A hidden class, is it? That term might sound like something straight out of a video game. But still, there were hunters with rare and strange abilities even in reality, such as hunters who could create shields or buff others, or even, the master of White Tiger Guild can apparently transform into a monster too, according to the rumors. All those hunters with rare and strange abilities were now enjoying a great deal of special treatment after being scouted by the biggest guilds out there. Could this hidden class thing be the same thing as the special abilities those hunters possess? If that were the case, this could be an opportunity instead. If I could only get to experience the class of necromancer just for a bit, I wouldn't even need to weigh my options this much. However, would anything in this world be that easy? There was no way the matters of this world would revolve according to his wishes, and worse still, he had never heard of anyone possessing an ability similar to that of a necromancer. Oh, Jinwoo took a sweeping look at all the broken remnants of the knights strewn about this place. Those mages. One could say that those mages in the class change quest were using roughly the same ability as a necromancer. It was certainly very difficult to fight all those knights who attacked him with complete disregard for their own lives. If he failed to figure out how to fight them until the end, or if the mages possessed very high close quarters combat abilities, then the one lying on the floor right now would be me instead of these scrap metal bits. Jinwoo stopped looking at the knights and raised his head. A certain look of determination flashed by in his eyes. I already possessed the close quarters combat ability, meaning he was different from those mages. What if there was a mage possessing excellent hand-to-hand combat skills who also happened to command an army? Wouldn't that be the worst of all worst possible nightmares for his enemies? What if, something he could only think about but couldn't do, wouldn't it be possible for him to enter a dungeon rated B or higher alone and clear it now? Jinwoo silently swallowed his saliva. If he were allowed to continue raising his stat values after becoming a necromancer, then obviously, the army under his command would also grow even more powerful than before. He couldn't even begin to imagine the effect of that. It'll no longer be only me leveling up. His own army would be leveling up, too. Bonus points, it said. But that was rather obvious, wasn't it? Not sure how long was the expected time, but well, I did endure for quite a long time, didn't I? He began smirking in satisfaction. Then all of a sudden, several messages inundated his vision. What's this? His ears hurt from all the beepings, but Jinwoo's focus was fixed elsewhere and didn't care anymore. As a matter of fact, he couldn't even hear those beeps now. A special reward. Those words jumped right up at him. A reward. Not only that, it was special, too. Jinwoo stopped trying to store the Night Killer in his inventory and concentrated on the message. His stares were now firmly fixed on it. Soon, follow-up messages popped up. Shadow Sovereign. Hearing that strange term, Jinwoo hurriedly summoned his status window. Indeed, there was a new term added to his class column. It's not a necromancer anymore. The system definitely said that he'd be able to get a higher ranked version of his class according to the amount of advancement points he had earned. And also, it mentioned that the point tally had exceeded the limits of the class itself, too. The end result from all that was this Shadow Sovereign. So, is this the special reward the system was talking about? The thing was, though, Jinwoo couldn't continue on with what he wanted to say. Right in front of his disbelieving eyes, a truly bizarre and hard-to-explain phenomenon began unfolding. Behind the hologram-like messages, unknown black smoke was slowly and eerily leaking out from the knights strewn about on the floor like scrap metal. No such thing happened prior to him getting his class. Whenever his eyes landed on targets with black smoke oozing out from them, the words with hard-to-fathom meanings possible to perform extraction popped up into his view. Shadow extraction. He couldn't understand why, but to Jinwoo, those rising smokes looked like they were writhing in pain. As a matter of fact, it felt like they were reaching out to him, begging him to save them. Would it be strange if he said that? He could hear their screams, but he was sure of one thing. He was sure of him being able to free them from their pain. Shadow extraction. I gotta set a separate activation phrase for this skill. Jinwoo pondered for a bit, before muttering out almost instinctively, "Rise up." Thick, heavy moans resounded out from somewhere, and at the same time, the shadows of the fallen knights began wiggling as if they were still alive. Jinwoo scanned his surroundings once more. All the shadows found near him were beginning to move. Soon enough, a black hand rose up from one of the shadows. It pressed down on the ground hard, and slowly, the arm attached to it rose up. Oh my god. Jinwoo's eyes opened wider and wider. Those things were people, no, soldiers possessing the outer appearance of a person. Soldiers kitted out head to toe in jet black armor climbed out of the shadows one by one. This is my new skill. By the time Jinwoo recovered his wits, there were a couple dozen soldiers standing by his side, waiting. Tens of soldiers were now surrounding him. What the hell is this? Jinwoo approached the nearest soldier. At first glance, they look like people, don't they? However, they weren't people. He couldn't sense any signs of life from them. They didn't breathe, and there were no heartbeats he could hear. On top of this, Jinwoo swallowed down his shocked gasp. He sneaked a glance inside the helmet through the eye holes and found nothing but pure darkness in there. Jinwoo slowly took several steps back after feeling like he was being sucked in. These things came out from the shadows. He immediately checked his skill window. Just as the system informed him, new class-specific skills could be found there now. Active skills. Shadow Extraction LV. 1. Shadow Storage LV. 1. He checked the details of the first skill. Class-specific skill. Required mana to activate, none. Creates a shadow soldier by extracting mana from the recently deceased life form. The odds of extraction failure will rise higher depending on the target's original stat values, as well as the length of time since its death. Number of shadows that can be extracted, 30/30. Oops, a thought flashed by in Jin Woo's head. I shouldn't be wasting time like this. He had witnessed the power of his new skill. He could now turn the defeated monsters into his soldiers. If that was the case, then wasn't there a monster nearby that he just had to turn into his lackey right away? Jin Woo searched around as his glare became sharper. Found it. Jin Woo stood before Ygritte. It might have been a fearsome enemy that threatened to kill him only a few hours ago, but now it was probably the best ingredient he could find. Fortunately enough, he saw the black smoke slowly oozing out from Ygritte, just like how it was with other fallen knights. Jin Woo's expression brightened. Nice. He already knew the drill. Oh yeah, there was something like that, wasn't there? At the end of the skill's explanation, there was something he should have taken note of. The maximum number of extractions he could perform was 30, which meant the number of his soldiers was currently 30. As his eyes swept past the soldiers, their names and levels appeared before his view. Regular grade. Everyone possessed the same name and level. Oh well, their origins were exactly the same, so. But then, he discovered 3 somewhat different colored soldiers right at the back of the infantrymen. Are those? Unlike the regular infantrymen, these guys were wearing robes. Elite grade. Oh, he quickly figured out what they were. The 3 mages that were controlling the Iron Golem must have been revived as undeads as well when he gave out his Rise Up command just now. So, 27 infantrymen and 3 mages, This was why being rare was a good thing. He excluded the low-numbered mages and selected the closest infantryman from him to cancel the extraction. And he was really sorry about this. Extraction cancellation. The soldier turned into black smoke and scattered in the air. Not even a trace remained of it. Jin Woo gazed at the spot of the disappeared soldier for a little while with an apologetic expression, before shifting his attention back to Ygritte. His preparation was complete. He even had to sacrifice one of his wonderful soldiers just so he could turn Ygritte into a shadow. So, he simply had to see some results here. Time to act while the sun still shone. Jin Woo tried the extraction right away. Rise up. When he did that, the shadow cast beneath Ygritte began to wiggle as if it came to life. It was the same reaction as when he extracted the shadows from the knights just now. Okay, good. Jin Woo clenched his fists tightly. He had a good feeling about this. What would Ygritte look like after its extraction? Jin Woo's hands became slick with the sweat of anticipation. Unfortunately, ting, a mechanical beep akin to a metal plate breaking in half rang inside his head. Hearing that he still had more chances remaining, Jin Woo spat out a long sigh of relief. Hang on, now that I think about it, the skill's explanation definitely said that the odds of extraction failure would rise up depending on the target's stat values. But having experienced it personally, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. It felt like he got slapped in the back of his head. This taste of his first failure. Not only that, there was a restriction on the number of attempts he could try, too. Jin Woo attempted the extraction for the second time. Rise up. Too bad. His expectation was shot down grandly once more. Ting. This guy gave him so much trouble while it was still alive, and even in death, it was managing to give him some serious headaches. Jin Woo closed his eyes and reorganized his thoughts. Well, it could be nothing more than percentages and odds, but it was possible that his desire to possess Ygritte's shadow wasn't earnest or strong enough. Jin Woo slowly reopened his eyes. He sensed the black smoke rising up from Ygritte reaching out to him, pleading with him to save it. Jin Woo became a lot more serious than before, and he reached out with his right hand as if to grab that pleading hand of the smoke. Rise up. He didn't do it deliberately. He himself didn't quite realize it then. But Jin Woo's voice sounded much heavier and graver than ever before, and it reverberated throughout the boss room. It was then. A deep scream could be heard coming from somewhere, and chilling, eerie winds swept by the boss room. Isn't this it? Jin Woo's expression brightened. He remembered encountering a similar situation like this one before, back when his infantryman first popped out from the shadows. Just as he hoped for, as the lengthy scream came to an end, a long black hand emerged out from the shadow. And when that hand pressed down on the ground, a new message popped up in his view. Jin Woo let out a cry of happiness. Yes, he tightly clenched his fists. The taste of success was so much sweeter since he had to go through 2 failures to get here. However, the good news didn't end there. I succeeded in strengthening. What? The shadow's starting level could be higher than 1. Jin Woo's eyes widened once more. Just as the message said, the Black Knight emerging from the shadow carried level 7 in its status. The message blinked as if to urge him on with the naming already. Jinwoo opened his mouth. Igrit the cry. No, hang on a minute. When the system asked him to set the name, it meant that he'd have to use that name to call this guy from here onwards. So, didn't that also mean that he'd have to call it Igrit the blah blah all the time from now on? Just thinking about that gave him a nasty case of goosebumps. That's way too cringy. In the end, he decided to shorten the name somewhat. Igrit. That's right. As soon as Jinwoo spoke, the question marks on the guy's head disappeared and the name Igrit appeared there. Ninth grade. All he did was to simply give it its original name, yet Jinwoo still felt like he had accomplished something pretty amazing. He was filled with contentment, knowing that this guy was his loyal soldier now. My own loyal soldier, eh? Jinwoo took a look behind him. 29 shadow soldiers were still there, waiting for his orders. For now, the number was too small. Only 30, huh? Either this was because the skill level of shadow extraction was too low, or because his intelligence stat hadn't been raised high enough yet. But he was sure of one thing, and that was the number of his soldiers would gradually swell up. When he took a step outside, the surroundings changed in an instant, and he was back in the empty lot of the local mountainside. It was none other than the very spot where he initiated his class change quest. The time indicated was 5 in the morning. It was already time for the sunrise. Oops. Jinwoo clicked his tongue while confirming the time. If I knew the quest would end up taking this long to complete, I should have left a message for Jin-Ah earlier. What a relief then, that he'd often come home late from raids taking longer than expected, back when he was working for the association. Jinwoo took one last look behind him, but the gate he exited from just now was already gone without a trace. When looking at the spot where the gate used to be, it kind of felt like he had woken up from a long dream. Jinwoo slept until late in the day, but that couldn't be helped. By the time he got back home, the sun had risen up pretty high already. Jinwoo's sweet slumber was eventually disrupted by the ringtone from his smartphone. His hand fumbled around near his head and with some difficulty located his phone. Hello. His voice cracked up from his dry throat. Appa, you are still asleep. You know what time it is. Jin-Ah's shocked voice came out from the speaker. So, he asked her back. Okay, what time is it now? It's 2 in the afternoon. Eh? What? He glanced at the time on the phone's screen with half-open eyes. She was telling the truth. Appa, you haven't forgotten that you're supposed to come to my school today, have you? Her voice sounded anxious. What time should I get there at the latest? Before 5. I won't be late, so don't worry. When you're near the school, give me a call first, okay? He didn't have a lot of time left if he were to get ready. Well, I'm going to meet my sister's homeroom teacher after all. Not only that, this teacher would be in charge of her 3rd year in high school, one of the most important periods in a person's life. So, I can't just wear whatever now, right? He opened the closet and rummaged through the clothes in there. However, he was greeted by a rather dusty, moldy odor. Of course, it was not something pleasant to smell at all. Jinwoo's frown deepened. He continued to dig around, but all he could find was an old business suit he wore once during his own high school graduation. Will it even fit me now? Been a while, but should I go on a shopping spree then? Before that, though, there was this small thing he had to confirm first. Actually, it was a bit bigger than that, but still. Jinwoo took off the old business suit and while sitting on the edge of the bed, summoned his status window. Stats. With that, a long board full of letters and numbers appeared before his eyes. Jinwoo could only chuckle wryly as his status window seemed to go on forever and ever. It was only a short while ago that there was nothing on this section over here. Indeed, there had been a time like that once. But now, just from looking at his skills and equipped items, his head grew fuzzy. Jinwoo lowered his gaze slightly while feeling rather pleased with himself. Then he spotted something else in the status window. Jinwoo checked out the hidden title's description, a title only given to those who have splendidly overcome their adversity. Your stat values will rise as your HP decreases. After reading the description, he thought that this title's effect would match up quite nicely with his passive, tenacity. The title Slaughterer of Wolves was a wonderful title as well that would give him a 40% stats increase against any and all beast-type monsters. However, because there was a strict activation condition attached to it, he often had to do without receiving the stat buff. He got his number in the queue, waited for his turn, before eventually sitting down in front of a bank teller. Hello there. A female teller with a bob-cut hair reaching just below her ears and a refreshing smile asked him politely, "How may I be of service today? I'd like to see the amount currently in the bank account, please." "I understand." With a smile, the female teller took the bank book Jinwoo presented to her. The female teller got to confirm the amount resting in Jinwoo's